Tight ends get a bad rap in fantasy football, but I can guarantee if you had Brock Bowers in 2024, you definitely didn't feel that way. Today, we take a deep dive into the tight end landscape. Who should you draft? Where should you get them? What should you do with them? Whether you're winning now or rebuilding, we'll tell you what to do with your tight ends on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Today we're talking tight ends. If you haven't already, make sure you go back and check out our quarterback, running back, and wide receiver shows. If you want my full rankings, you can go over to ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, if you got any questions, you can put them in the comments below or hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. Plus, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. But let's get into it for today, not waste any more time. And of course, number one is Brock Bowers, and that should be no surprise to anybody. Really doesn't matter what's happening in your league. Brock Bowers is the tight end to own. I suspect he'll be the number one in redraft, and he's definitely the number one in Dynasty as well. He had over 150 targets last year, and while they brought in some wide receiver reinforcements and Ashton Genty, he'll still be the number one guy again next year. He's essentially their top wide receiver. He essentially plays that role, and they will use a little bit of Michael Mayer in a traditional tight end role so that Bowers can make sure he's receiving every single down. For that reason, he is by far and away the top tight end. Plus, he's very young, so you're going to get value out of him for years to come. Trey McBride comes in at number two, and he's a very solid player. Went over 1,000 yards last season, the tight end 3. The biggest issue for McBride is he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, has 9 touchdowns in his first 3 seasons combined, but especially in a PPR league, the value is there. The floor is very, very high, only 26. He's going to be very solid for years to come. We can see even with Marvin Harrison Jr. in the team, McBride was still a very, very key cog in what they were doing, and he's going to remain that way for the distant future. So McBride's someone you should definitely get your hands on, no matter where your dynasty league is, especially in a PPR league. Sam Laporta had a little bit of a fall last season after being the tight end 1 in 2023. His touchdowns dropped a little bit, but it was mainly his target share that dropped the most. Jamison Williams emerging really made a massive difference, and all of a sudden Laporta became the third pass catcher, arguably the fourth pass catcher after the running backs in this offense, and that really hurt him. He did start to emerge a little bit later in the year, but he does come with a little bit of risk, and there is a fair old distance between him and McBride, and there's a distance between McBride and Bowers as well. Having said that, Laporta's still very young, only 24, going to be good for a good decade to come, possibly. So you are going to get a lot of value out of him. You can probably buy him pretty cheap after his down season. So he's someone I'm interested in getting my hands on, especially with a lot of talk about Jamison Williams potentially being traded, though I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to happen. Also worth mentioning that Isaac Teslar obviously got drafted by the Lions. He's a big-bodied guy who could threaten Laporta's efficiency in the red zone, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But I still think Laporta is a clear tight end 3 for me, although I do really like TJ Hawkinson as well. His 6th season didn't go as planned because of injury, but the previous 2 seasons before that, he was a top 3 tight end. And I think even with JJ McCarthy, that's going to continue. We do know that rookie quarterbacks, and essentially JJ McCarthy is a rookie, do tend to be very, very good for a tight end because they check down more often than most. McCarthy's not exactly a big rusher either. So while he loses Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins from before that, he does get a quarterback who is probably going to really help him out. And we're still talking about a guy who has years to come. He's still only 28. So there's a good chance you get another 4 or 5 years out of Hawkinson. So if you're in a win now window, he's someone I really want to get my hands on. Even if I'm thinking I'm going to be winning in a season or 2, I still think he's going to be very good for the next couple of seasons. So you can buy him pretty cheap after what happened last season. So I would be trying to get my hands on Hawkinson while everyone's excited about the rookies. Speaking of rookies, Tyler Warren, I mean, he's young, he's a good receiver, but I think he's a little bit overrated compared to what everyone thinks of him. He's going pretty late, admittedly, in Dynasty rookie drafts. You can generally get him around the 8th, 9th, 10th pick, and that's pretty good value for what I think you're going to get here. Realistically, whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, though, are you going to get a lot of checking down to the tight ends? I think probably not. You've got to hope that he's actually running as a proper receiver rather than just being an outlet, because both of those guys will tend to use their legs rather than check down. I think with Warren, you're going to have to be patient, because I feel like it wouldn't surprise me if the Colts have a new tight end outside Richardson and outside Jones within the next couple of years. So maybe if you're thinking of going and getting Warren, maybe wait a couple of years. I feel like he's not going to be as explosive as he will be in the future in his first couple of seasons. This might be a little bit more of a slow burn compared to what we're used to from the likes of Laporta and Bowers, and to an extent Dalton Kincaid as well. So he still slides in as my tight end 5, but definitely not a win now option, definitely a rebuild option. And if you're rebuilding and you need a tight end because you got one of the older guys like an Andrews or an Njoku, I do love Warren as a long-term option. I just don't like him in the short term. In fact, if I'm challenging now, George Kittle is a guy I'm definitely going out and getting. Obviously 32 now, so he's only got a couple of seasons left in him, but he's gone over 1,000 yards the last couple of seasons, top 5 the last 4 seasons. In fact, top 5, 6 of the last 7 seasons, with the only one where he wasn't. He only played 8 games. Problem is he hasn't really been able to stay healthy. In fact, I don't think he's had a fully healthy season since 2018. So you are going to have to kind of ride that wave of injuries and what that does to his effectiveness. His yards per reception has really gone up in the last couple of seasons with better wide receivers around him. Be interesting to see what happens with Deebo Samuel gone, but I think with Christian McCaffrey there, it does open up a lot of space for Kittle up the seam, and that really helps him. He had his most receptions in the last 5 years last season, was nearly 100 targets, and I think if he played every game of the season, he would have gone over 100. So the upside is there. Personally, for me, just for the short term, I would consider him a top 2 or 3 tight end. I really do think he's going to have another big season. I think Deebo not being there and Brandon Ayuk coming off an ACL really opens things up for Kittle. And it wouldn't surprise me if most weeks he's a top 2 maybe target getter in this offense. And with the way they're planning on running it through Brock Purdy, I think that's going to be worth a lot. So Kittle's a guy I want to get my hands on in the short term. If you're thinking long term, though, I might consider waiting a few weeks to see if he has an explosive start to the season and then sell him, unless someone really wants to get their hands on him, because I do feel like his value is going to go up and down, and you kind of want to strike when the value's high if you're in a rebuild and you want to sell him. Same kind of situation with Mark Andrews. We saw what happened with Isaiah Likely's value, where he had one good week in week 1 of last season, and all of a sudden Mark Andrews is a guy you could get pretty much free, depending on who owned him. And Isaiah Likely was someone that was going in the 2nd round of some best ball draft, which is absolutely insane. So Mark Andrews is going to be the guy again this year. You will see some Likely as well. Andrews not the guy he used to be, but got double-digit touchdowns last season. If he continues to be a red zone threat and this offense continues to be pretty pass-heavy, I do expect that Andrews is going to be very effective. Overall, the tight end 6 last season. In fact, he's been a top 6 tight end each of the last 6 years, except for that one season in 2023, where he only played 10 games. Finally stayed fully healthy last season. It's possible that this season he's able to roll in and be more effective because his health is better. He's not even 30 yet. So we are talking about a guy that you don't want to be getting rid of yet. I feel like the upside's there. It'll be interesting to see what happens with he and Likely, because they're both in the last year of their contract. It's possible that one of them moves on, or it's possible they both hang around, or some combination of the two. Regardless of where Andrews goes, unless he goes into a real mixed threat of a tight end room, I do feel like Andrews is going to be a good chance of remaining a top tight end in the league, and certainly a top 10 option, at least for the next 3 or 4 seasons. So if you're in win now mode and you're a little bit desperate at tight end, Andrews is someone that you can certainly use and feel okay about. Another guy that goes into that same category, especially in PPR, is David Njoku. He was very good in 2023, especially down the stretch in 2023. He was the top tight end in the second half of 2023, but he just couldn't stay healthy last year. His yards per reception dropped by 3 yards. He was averaging 7.9 yards per reception, which is insanely low. Had nearly 100 targets, but couldn't do anything with it because the quarterback play was just too bad. Jameis Winston didn't particularly want to throw to him, and they weren't really healthy at the same time. And most of the other guys just weren't making it work with him. But I feel like with a Joe Flacco coming in, or one of these rookies, that's all going to help Njoku. So I feel like in the near future, with him still only being 29, you're going to get 2 or 3 at least good years out of him, especially while the Browns are rebuilding. I feel like he's someone that's safe, that they can rely on. I know a lot of people are nervous about Harold Fannin, and I'd be trying to rely on that idea because Fannon's not someone who can block at all. He's literally a receiving tight end who'll take years to develop into an actual every down tight end. So while I think that Fana will be used in the red zone at times, I still think Njoku's an every down tight end and could end the season with the most targets, or at least with a heap of targets, depending on how effectively Judy and also Cedric Tillman get used. So Njoku's someone I really like, especially if you're in win now mode. If, on the other hand, you're rebuilding, Colston Loveland is a solid option. This feels like it has the upside of being a Brock Bowers situation, but there are a couple of key differences. Firstly, it's similar in that he's going into a situation where there is an established tight end there. Obviously, Bowers went in when Michael Mayer had come in there and was kind of the expected number one as a reasonably early draft pick. In this case, obviously, the Chiefs already have Cole Kmet there. They've got him signed to for the next 3 years, but I think he's going to be more of a blocker and Loveland is going to be more of the every down guy like Bowers is. The difference is Bowers had no wide receivers to compete with at all. There was absolutely nothing to worry about, whereas Chicago has a heap of weapons. They've got DJ Moore as their deep threat. They got Rome Odunze as an existing big-bodied guy, and they've also got Luther Burden as the slot guy. Plus, they also have a relatively good receiving back in DeAndre Swift. So that means Loveland is really going to have to fight for targets, and that's going to hurt him in the short term. I do feel like in the next couple of seasons, we will see him be solid, but I think his volume is going to be very low and he's going to have to get by on touchdowns, etc. So don't expect much from Loveland in the next couple of years, but he is someone that could be a bargain, say year 2, year 3, once DJ Moore is gone, once Cole Kmet's gone. I feel like he's someone who could emerge as a very solid option, especially if this offense continues to build, and I feel like it could be very good with the improved O-line. Pat Freiermuth does fly under the radar a little bit, but he was a top 12 tight end last season. And it was only a couple of years before that, he was a top 6 tight end. It really is down to how they choose to use him. And I think they're going to use him a lot. They've got DK Metcalf, and then they've got nothing else. Calvin Austin is probably their wide receiver too. I think Roman Wilson is expected to emerge, but he had 1 target last season. Robert Woods is nominally their wide receiver 3. It's not like they have the greatest receiving running backs either. It'll really depend on what happens with guys like Warren and Johnson and stuff like that. But I do think that Freiermuth is probably technically the second receiver for the Steelers. It will depend on who their quarterback is. If it's Mason Rudolph, I actually think Freiermuth could have a pretty good season. If it's Aaron Rodgers, he still could be pretty solid. It's just going to be less volume-based and more efficiency-based. So regardless of what happens there, I do really like Freiermuth over the next season or two, but I feel like eventually they're going to get in wide receiver help, and he's going to fade into more of that, can I start him each week kind of guy. Having said that, the upside's definitely here. I feel good about Freiermuth, at least in the next year or two. Plus, he's still someone who's relatively young. He's 27. He's effectively in his prime or going into his prime. So I expect a lot of good things about Pat Freiermuth. Now, outside the top 10, and Dalton Kincaid was someone I loved in his rookie season, and he really shone when Dawson Knox wasn't playing. The problem is, Dawson Knox played for most of last season, and he is under contract for the next couple of seasons as well. He's only 29, so Kincaid is going to remain more of a bit part player. He was the one that struggled with injuries last season. He has 4 career touchdowns over 29 games, which is concerning for a tight end. He just wasn't getting the volume, but they have no wide receivers either. So the upside is really there for Kincaid to be that big-bodied receiver. Are they going to do that? Well, I think it depends on what happens with Keon Coleman, how Joshua Palmer gets used as more of that deep threat, and how that affects Coleman's usage. Do they bring in a bit more of Caden Prather, for example, as a real big-bodied guy? I don't know, but I feel like we could see some more 2 tight end sets, and that's really going to help Kincaid if he's consistently out there on every single down and has more of a wide receiver style role than playing as a traditional tight end. I don't know if that's going to happen, but when you've got Josh Allen as quarterback, the upside's there and it's always a possibility. So I feel like Kincaid has upside. He's a talented player. I do like the idea of rostering him and taking a punt and seeing what happens. Dallas Goedert comes in next. And for me, this is more of a talent thing. I do think Goedert's a very good tight end. He's 30 and he gets a lot of targets whenever he is healthy. The problem is he hasn't had a fully healthy season since his rookie season back in 2018. But for the most part, he has been a top 12 tight end. Certainly on a per game basis, he has been a lot quieter last season. And there has been a lot of talk about him potentially being traded. I don't know if that's going to happen. He did just rework his deal, and I feel like that kind of locks him into staying for at least this season while the Eagles are in their Super Bowl window. While AJ Brown and Devonta Smith are both playing, it is hard for Goddard. It is hard for all three of them to be effective, especially with Saquon Barkley there. You kind of need to be hoping for an injury to either Smith or Brown, or I guess Barkley, for Goddard to really get a reasonable amount of targets. But I feel like the talent's there and the upside's there. So there is really more potential upside with him than most of the other guys around here. However, the guys below him probably have a more accessible upside, I think you might say. Jonnu Smith, for example, very good last season, was the tight end for. I doubt it's going to happen again. Interestingly, we've had Adam Schefter in saying the last day or so that Smith might potentially be traded to the Steelers, and that really hurts his value. You can kind of understand why he might want to do that. It does feel like the Dolphins are kind of hitting a rebuild, and realistically, it's not like Smith is young. He's in his 30s now. They don't have anything behind him, though, at tight end. So I can't imagine the Dolphins doing that. I feel like they're going to try to hold on and just see if they can make things work. But last season, nearly 900 yards, over 100 targets, 8 touchdowns. Big breakout season after being the tight end 13 back in 2020 was his other good season. So he has been around for a long time and he's had a lot of down seasons, but finally shone last season. Can he keep that going? I'm not convinced that he can. I feel like surely the Dolphins need to look at what happened last year and say that didn't work. We need to be getting our running backs more effectively involved. We need to use our talented wide receivers. Waddle, for example, was totally wasted last year. If they're going to keep Tyreek Hill, they need him to be the number one guy. While Tua Tagovailoa is healthy, I don't think you're going to see as much of Jonnu Smith, or certainly not schemed up Jonnu Smith as much as we saw last season. Plus, there's a possibility he just moves anyway, and in that case, I think he's going to drop in value. So that's why I'm very nervous about him for Dynasty, his age and his possible role, plus potentially might even be out of the team. Brendan Strange, a really interesting one. There is a huge amount of potential here for him to take over that Evan Ingram role. Problem is the Evan Ingram role is very volume heavy, but not exactly touchdown heavy. Ingram hardly gets a touchdown most seasons, and Strange only has 3 touchdowns in the last couple of seasons as well. The Jaguars certainly have opportunities there behind Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter, and we don't even know what's going to happen with Hunter. It's really just like De'Ami Brown and guys like that with no Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis there anymore. That really opens up possibilities for Brendan Strange because the running backs are not exactly effective pass catchers or oft-used pass catchers anyway. So I like the idea of Strange being a little bit of a sleeper option. You can get him pretty cheap. Probably only need to trade maybe a 3rd-round pick potentially for him in some leagues. Maybe even, look, I would personally trade a late second for him. I do feel like the value's there. If he's struggling at tight end, he is someone that could easily be a top 10 tight end this season, and I would not be shocked at all. He just needs to stay healthy and get the volume of an Evan Ingram, and all of a sudden in PPR, you've got yourself a real value. So he's someone I like going out and getting cheap. I feel like there's a massive amount of value there. Now we've got another rookie here in Mason Taylor, and I do think the talent is here. Be interesting to see how the Jets use him, but it is worth remembering that Tyler Conklin has been one of the better Jets receivers over the last couple of seasons. Conklin has tended to be around that kind of tight end 10 to tight end 18 region most seasons, and certainly most weeks he gets a lot of receptions. Certainly was one of the highest tight end receivers in the last couple of seasons. Could Mason Taylor be that guy? I mean, potentially. He can block enough to be an every down tight end, and he's a solid enough receiver to be out there, especially in the red zone where he can be very good. It's a real question of how they value Jeremy Ruckert and what effect Ruckert is going to have on Taylor's usage. Most tight ends aren't very good in their rookie season. We've started to see that early round tight ends do tend to get used straight away. Whether Taylor falls into that category is a big question mark. Because I don't think the Jets really need to push his progression. I could imagine him waiting a season or two before he really emerges, but this is Dynasty. So if you're rebuilding, then he's certainly someone that's worth getting your hands on. Kyle Pitts just keeps on falling for me. I think we're starting to see the issue, and that's that he can't block very well. He's one of the weakest blockers as a run blocker in the league, and that means he's off the field way too often. Plus, the Falcons have so many other options in Drake London, in Bijan Robinson, and Darnell Mooney that they don't need to pass to Pitts. He doesn't need to be their number one guy like he was in his rookie season back in 2021. He has been the tight end 14 in the last couple of seasons. He had his most ever touchdowns last season, but yards per game was the lowest we've ever seen from him. It really was a very mixed year last year. His targets per game really dropped as well. Under 50 receptions in when you play a whole season is just not enough at tight end. So, Pitch, you're really hoping that the talent shines through at some stage. He's in the last year of his contract. Obviously, his 50-year option he's playing out. I find it hard to believe he's going to re-sign if this is how he's going to be used. I feel like there are teams that would like to use him more effectively as a pass catcher, and he might go there. So that's kind of where the upside is, because it's not going to happen with the Falcons. Kadon, more of a consistent option rather than an upside option like a Pitts or a Taylor. I do like what Otten did last season. He was obviously the tight end 13. That's despite them having a heap of wide receiver options. The thing you love with Otten, he's out there nearly every snap. He has a higher route count than pretty much every other tight end. He's certainly top 3 most weeks. And that means there's always going to be opportunities. When the other wide receivers were out, he was pretty effective. But realistically, you only really need one wide receiver injury, and all of a sudden they do tend to use him quite a bit. And he still has those big weeks anyway. We saw that in the playoffs. So Otten has some upside and a solid weekly floor. Not a great touchdown option, which kind of hurts a little bit, but at least 600 yards last year. Heaps of targets, just as good, solid tight end 2 option, especially if you're in a tight end premium league or just need a backup guy who you can use on a bye week, because realistically in Dynasty, you do need those kind of guys who you can kind of just feel good about slotting in whenever you have an injury to your top guy or something else is going on. I think Otten's very safe from that perspective. Tucker Kraft also relatively safe, but in a different way. He was the tight end 9 last year, but he was very efficient, had like 14 yards per reception, which is tremendously high and isn't going to happen again, especially not with the wide receivers they brought in. Did have 7 touchdowns as well, which really helped. Be interesting to see what happens when Luke Musgrave is fully healthy. It is possible that's going to have an impact, but it does feel like in Green Bay, we've got that sort of Baltimore situation where they drafted Mark Andrews as their second tight end, and then he emerged as the top guy. I really do think that could happen here, where Luke Musgrave is kind of the Hayden Hurst equivalent as the earlier drafted guy, but Kraft is the guy who emerges. Does seem to be the case, but in any of those situations, even though it didn't happen for Andrews, there is the risk that the higher drafted guy does show his quality. I do really like Luke Musgrave as a talent, so it is possible that Kraft's a threat from that perspective as well. I think there's just a little bit too much going on in a reasonably low volume committee-based offense to feel great about Kraft in a yearly basis. I feel like it's going to be another one of those situations where a tight end has one good season and then goes back to being like the tight end 20 the next year. I feel like that's the sort of path we're seeing for Tucker Kraft. He is young though, and the upside's there, so he's worth rostering at the very least. Elijah Arroyo obviously comes in to Seattle, where they already have both Noah Fant and also AJ Barner, and it's Barner that scares me, because I think that Fant's probably going to be out, if not this year, where there is an out in his contract, certainly at the end of his contract at the end of this year. I just don't see that all kind of coming together and working. So for that reason, I think that Barner probably remains the blocking guy. That is his better area, even though he had some receiving stuff going on last year. And I think Arroyo is coming in as more of the receiving threat. He is a very, very good receiving tight end. He's an okay blocker, and he could develop into a starter, but I feel like he's probably more likely to be in a situation where there's a bit of a committee between he and Barner long term, but Arroyo remains the leading receiver. They didn't need to go out and get a tight end. They had a heap of other needs, and yet they chose to do so. So I expect we see some more two tight end sets this season without enough good wide receivers on the roster. It's not like we're going to see MBS every down or Jake Bobo or someone like that. So I do feel like Arroyo is someone that they feel pretty solid about, and he is going to get some receiving work this season. It's just whether he can get enough to be good for Dynasty. Evan Ingram comes in at 20, and this is more of an age thing. I don't really know that he's going to be hanging around the league for long enough to really pay off. He's now into his 30s, and we're talking about a guy who's had some injury issues. He's struggled to find touchdowns, hasn't had more than 4 touchdowns since his rookie season in New York. Obviously had a pair of top 5 seasons in 22 and 23, but that was how the Jags used him. I don't think the Broncos are going to use him in the same way. I know that Sean Payton's been looking for that X factor, but they've already got Courtland Sutton. We know that they're trying to run the ball a little bit more, and RJ Harvey is an okay receiver as well. Plus, they've got some other receiving backs. We know that they've got a heap of other wide receivers behind Sutton. I do think we're going to see a lot more of Marvin Mims. I think we'll see a little bit of Troy Franklin, DeVaughn Vele, and plus they just drafted Pat Bryant as well. So how does Ingram fit in there? Well, he's clearly the top tight end, but does that have a lot of value? I don't know that it does. We haven't really seen them use their tight ends that effectively. We know Sean Payton has done it in the past, but I think his ceiling is kind of a top 10 tight end this season, and you're not likely to see him around for more than a season or two. Plus, injuries are always going to be an issue these days with Ingram. So, for that reason, I don't feel great about him, and that's why he's ranked pretty low for me. Terrence Ferguson is someone that was a big reach for the Rams, but realistically, they don't have much and they need some good receiving options. Obviously, they already have Puka Nacua and they've got Devontae Adams as the main two receivers, but behind that, they do need a supplementary guy. And I feel like that could be Ferguson because Tyler Higbee is really aging, and I feel like within a season or two, he's going to be out. He's 32 already, Higbee. Ferguson comes in as the second round guy, I should say, takes over that role as the starting tight end within a season or two. And all of a sudden, you've got a guy who's got some value because we have seen the Rams offer some value from their starting tight end. So that's why I feel solid about Ferguson as an option. I'm not really willing to go out of my way to get him because there is so much risk and you're going to have to wait. But if you're rebuilding, here's a solid option you can get late in your rookie drafts or potentially even pick up if you're in a particularly shallow league. Hunter Henry is more of a depth option. You know what you're kind of going to get here. You're going to get a guy who's pretty solid most weeks. They did bring in Stephon Diggs, obviously, and that's going to affect the amount of space Henry has over the field, middle of the field, assuming that Diggs is still on the team by the time the season starts. And I think there's more question marks around that. I think he probably will be. But there's certainly some question marks over how that's going to look and whether he's going to be healthy. So Henry has the opportunity of, I guess, potentially being the top receiver. They didn't have much last season, and they still don't have very much. At least they've got a functional running back now who's not going to fumble the ball all the time in Travion Henderson. Obviously, they also have some other good receiving backs. They have plenty of wide receivers. It's just behind Diggs, there's not a lot of quality there. So Henry could be that most downs guy who is going to be solid. He was the tight end 12 last season, and he only had 2 touchdowns, had nearly 100 targets and nearly 700 yards. So the upside is there. The problem is he's not going to be around for much longer, and he's never going to be more than just that sort of tight end 12 guy. We're talking about a guy who's 31 now. You might get another season or two out of him, but realistically, the fantasy value is mostly gone. So you're really only getting him if you're desperate to pick him up off waivers, essentially, or free agency, and kind of be that bench guy who can be the number 2 for you because the upside is pretty limited. Travis Kelce, sadly, I find it hard to believe we're going to get more than, say, 1 season out of him. And I don't think he's going to be the player he used to be. 36 now. It's just really impressive what he's done. Still managed to be the tight end 5 last season. That was after, 8 consecutive top 2 tight end finishes, including 6 as the tight end 1. He's been incredible, but he's just not the player he used to be. The fire doesn't seem to be there during the regular season. He kind of cruises through the regular season and then gets it done in the playoffs. Having said that, last season, still nearly 100 receptions, 800 yards. The 3 touchdowns really hurt, but it was his yards per reception that was really down. That just wasn't as effective as he has been in the past. He had, 9 straight seasons with at least 12 yards per reception. And last season, he had 8.5 yards per reception. That efficiency is very low. The touchdown total, where he's usually getting double-digit touchdowns where he's healthy, all of a sudden we're getting 3. It's a real concern. So he is still going to be the number 1 tight end, at least for now. But you're going to see a little bit more Noah Gray to rest Kelce, I think. And we have 3 good functional wide receivers, assuming that we actually get Rashee Rice playing. For that reason, I can't feel good about Kelce. And it's entirely possible you have him on your team and then he's not even playing. Because I don't think retirement is totally out of the question yet either. So that really lowers his value for me. Having said that, if you're in a pure win now window, I do think he is worth paying up for because he still should be a solid top 10 tight end, assuming he plays this season. Now, behind Kelce is Mike Gesicki, who just signed a big contract with the Bengals, and they're passing the ball so much that their top tight end is still a viable option because they don't really use their wide receiver 3 and they don't pass their running backs a lot. Behind T. Higgins and, of course, Jamar Chase, all of a sudden you have a good 3rd receiving option. Gesicki only had 2 touchdowns last season, but he wasn't even playing as an every down tight end for most of the season, and yet he still managed to have over 80 targets, 665 yards, top tight end 15 on the season. I mean, there's some value there. there is a possibility that he's going to emerge as a top 10 tight end this season. He certainly was at times last season. So you can get him very cheap, stash him on your bench, and just see what happens through the first couple of weeks and see if he is truly their third receiving option. If you get an injury to a T. Higgins or a Jamar Chase, all of a sudden Gesicki suddenly becomes a guy you can really use. Speaking of guys who need an injury ahead of him, I think that's the case with Isaiah Likely. You see Mark Andrews out, and all of a sudden Likely becomes a guy you feel really good about starting. Last season, we had that ridiculous situation where he had an amazing first week, was just absolutely smashing against the Chiefs, nearly scored that game-winning touchdown on top of another touchdown and over 100 yards. And yet, suddenly, after that, becomes the tight end 2 again and wasn't really used effectively. In fact, last season, he had less total targets than he did in his first season, in his rookie season, which is crazy, despite having way more yards and twice the amount of touchdowns. So he was the tight end 17 in this most recent season. That's okay, but that's not something you can get excited about for Dynasty. You really are hoping that there's an Andrews injury. Not that you ever want to hope for an injury to a player, but that is why you're rostering him. This is the last year of his contract, and it is possible that either he or Andrews leaves. I think they can probably keep Likely for cheaper, and so that's possibly what they'll do, and that will really help his value. So there is some Dynasty value there. It's just a question of what it looks like, and I think there's a lot of risk associated with it because I don't think his blocking's really good enough to make him an every down tight end. Jake Ferguson comes in at 26, and this is really hurt by George Pickens arriving. Ferguson got by on the fact that they had no one behind CeeDee Lamb, and now they just plain do. George Pickens going to suction up a whole lot of targets around just in general. Lamb's obviously going to be Lamb. So unless there's an injury somewhere there, Ferguson becomes someone you can't really trust. He wasn't great last season in general anyway, but he is still young. So assuming someone like a Luke Schoonmaker doesn't come in and start taking opportunities away from him, Ferguson's going to remain a solid guy. I know the stats say he was the tight end 25 last season, but he had no touchdowns, 0 touchdowns. Nearly 500 yards, 86 targets, 0 touchdowns, which is crazy a little bit, to be fair. And I don't know that's going to change massively, but he had 5 the season before and was a top 10 tight end. So the upside's there. It's just hard to feel very good about him. If you're in rebuilding mode, he's someone I actually don't feel bad about rostering him deep on my roster because he is very young. And there is a possibility with Dak Prescott back that all of a sudden you start to see the potential that we saw from him in 2023. Theo Johnson in that same situation, someone you can feel good about kind of emerging this season. Doesn't really have much to compete against. They do have a lot of depth in their tight ends, but I think we can see clearly that Johnson is the number one guy. He was running a lot of routes last season, which is usually very positive. He just wasn't getting the targets. And I feel like this season, whether it's Russell Wilson or Jackson Dart or somehow Jameis Winston, that we are going to see Johnson get used more effectively. And if that happens, all of a sudden there's some upside there. So a little bit of upside with Theo Johnson, not a lot, but you can at least feel good about the potential there. So again, if you're in a rebuilding mode and you want someone that could build into something in the future, I think Johnson, especially in a deep bench league, is someone you can take a punt on. Harold Fannin, we talked about earlier, very good receiving tight end, but doesn't offer much as an every down tight end. Having said that, in a season or two, you could see him emerge as a starting option. I feel like unlike everyone below him, there is a lot more upside for him to turn into something. So for that reason, I'm willing to take a punt on him if I have bench space and I'm in a rebuilding team. Dalton Schultz in at 29, which seems crazy. He is 29 himself now. But had a particularly poor season last season. Only 2 touchdowns didn't help, but it wasn't even a top 20 tight end. Managed to get over 500 yards. 85 targets, should be doing better with that. But no, the upside's just not there. They got so many wide receivers. Cade Stover's kind of coming through. They like to run the ball as well. There's just too much going on there, and this offense isn't scoring enough to really sustain a tight end in addition to everything else that's happening. So for that reason, Schultz doesn't particularly interest me. Neither does Noah Fant, who comes in at 30. I think he probably becomes more of a blocking option. With Elijah Arroyo becoming more of the starter. But it is possible that we still see Fant start for this season and then head off at the end of his contract or potentially get traded away or moved on from at some stage during the preseason. And if that happens, the opportunity is going to be there. He has 1 total touchdown in his last 31 games over the last 2 seasons. 500 yards last season, which is actually his best in the last 3 seasons, even though he missed a few games. So there is a little bit of upside there, but it's hard to feel really good about this situation. It is pretty ugly. Outside those top 30 guys, a couple of names worth mentioning. Firstly, Noah Gray. If we see a Travis Kelce retirement suddenly, all of a sudden Noel Gray will become someone that everyone wants to roster. So you can get in there early, stick him deep on your bench, and just not think about him until Kelsey retires and see what happens. The Carolina guys, Chavian Sanders and Tommy Tremble, I think it's a bit too messy for me, but Sanders certainly has more upside. I did like him going into last season. He had opportunities and he looked really good when Tremble didn't play, and yet somehow they just managed to find ways to not use him when Tremble was healthy. So for that reason, can't feel great about Sanders. The Tennessee guys, Chiga Okonkwo, someone I loved a couple of seasons ago, finally started to emerge towards the end of last season. And then they drafted Gunnar Helm. I do feel like Helm is going to be a bit of a threat to Okonkwo because I just don't think they like what they're getting from him. Okonkwo ultimately ended up as the tight end 18 last season, despite having 6 career touchdowns over 3 seasons and being a starter pretty much that whole time. I feel like we've seen what we're going to see from him. In New Orleans, you do have Juwan Johnson, but there's a lot of other stuff going on there. You've got Taysom Hill. Foster Moreau's having a lot more of a role than we like. So Johnson's someone I just can't feel good about, even though he's still relatively young, still in his 20s. I feel like he's still a little bit scary for me. Washington's also interesting. I think Ben Sinnott probably takes over from Zach Ertz in the near future. That gives him a little bit of upside, but ultimately I don't know what we're going to get out of him. I think we've kind of seen that he may not be certainly a star tight end at any point, but the upside is there. A couple of other names that I think are interesting. Cade Stover in Houston, I think, could become a starting tight end in the future. Eric All looked really good in Cincinnati before the injury. The fact they re-signed Mike Gesicki really hurts there, but All is a very solid player. If you're in a win now mode, we know that Taysom Hill can be a solid player to get, so not a bad idea to go and get Hill. Zach Ertz, also a one-year guy who could provide some useful value as well. And that's all we've got for the tight end show, my number 2 show, the May update of my Dynasty tight end rankings. If you want to talk Dynasty, if you want to talk rookie rankings, make sure you head over to my website at ffdfantasyfootball.com. You can also hit me up if you've got any questions, either in the comments below or on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. It'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. I've got a heap more Dynasty stuff coming out in the near future. Plus, I've also nearly finished my updated redraft rankings as well. So check out that as well. Look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. Enjoy your weekend.